Mr. Harrington, could you please introduce yourself to our audience?
Yes, my name is Jim Harrington, and I'm the director of the Texas Civil Rights Project, and I also teach law at the University of Texas.
How did you come up with the idea of writing this book?
I had been on a trip to Turkey about 3 years ago, and so I got interested in it probably because my human rights work. I've done a lot of travel in different parts of the world in human rights work. Always been intrigued by how other legal systems protect human rights or don't protect human rights. And as I got looked into this, I found that nobody had written about the trial that had gone on. And so I decided to write about it because there's a really interesting interplay that happens between the attempt of Turkey to join the European Union and the European Union's insistence that there be changes in the judicial system and that individual rights and liberties be strengthened. And so I started to write about it. I did a lot of research and went back to Turkey twice and interviewed a number of people about the trial that actually went on a total of 8 years. To me, it was very fascinating. And unlike a lot of political trials, I mean, clearly it was a political trial. It was brought by enemies of Mr. Gülen in the government at the time. But unlike many political trials, this had a good ending. And I think it benefited Turkey quite a bit, obviously. And it also benefited Mr. Gülen because he was acquitted. And the judges ruled that all the charges against him were totally fabricated and there was no support.
How long did it take for you to finish the book?
It took me a year to write it. I spent quite a few evenings, late evenings, and weekends and holidays writing it because I have a full-time job and I also teach. So it took a while, but I was very interested in it. And it was a work of love because it was just fascinating to me, and I like to write. So, but it did take a year, a little bit more than a year altogether.
You referred to the trial as a political trial. Why it is a political trial and what differentiates a political trial than a regular one?
Well, in a political trial, of course, the government or whoever's bringing the case, the prosecutor, is basically prosecuting the individual because of the individual's political views, that those views are contrary to the establishment, and that this person's views or this person's actions pose a threat. And in Mr. Gülen's context, of course, he was indicted because of his views, and essentially the government was saying he was trying to establish a religious state and Sharia law and things like that, and then also a bunch of other allegations that were totally baseless. But it was a way of discrediting him. And the other part of this, of course, is that under Turkish law, if he had been convicted, then the government would have tried to seize all of the institutions and the schools and all of that that were related to the movement. Even though there's not a direct tie, of course, but you can tell by the indictment that the government was very much threatened by the movement because it changed the dynamic of Turkey. It had a lot to do with the rising middle class in the Anatolia region. It had a lot to do with transparency in the government. It had a lot to do with basically bringing more democracy to Turkey. So that was a threat to the established order. And for that reason, they engineered this awful media campaign against him for about a year before they finally indicted him. So it was purely political because all what the establishment was doing or the prosecutor was doing was try to undermine Mr. Gülen's credibility with the people, get him out of commission, and try to seize assets and schools and like that that are related to the movement. So there's no doubt in my mind it was political. There was no crime. Ultimately the judges said when they made their ruling, they said, there was absolutely no allegation that any crime took place whatsoever. It's purely political speech, his political ideas, or what the state thought was his political ideas, for which he was prosecuted.
Are there any lessons to be learned from the trial in general?
You know, that's very, very much true. And I tell you, I was very inspired by a lot of the people that I interviewed in Turkey that had really committed themselves to democracy and had worked really hard. And of course, over the years, during the periods of the military coups, some of the people actually had been tortured, one person suffered an attempted assassination, and some people had to leave the country. And I think what inspired me about this was how dedicated people were. And when you contrast it to our country, United States, you know, now we've been around for 220 plus years, we've lost, I think, our sense of what we went through, fought for to become independent and to become a democracy and to become the country that we are. And you look at a young democracy like Turkey, and I think it's very inspiring for us to, as an opportunity to recommit ourselves. But I think also as a country, this is the type of movement around the world that we should support as a country. Unfortunately, many times I think the United States gets stuck in supporting people that they have supported. And I think one of the lessons that we've learned and can learn about Turkey, and one of the lessons that we've learned from the Arab awakening, is that our country needs to respond to these impulses of democracy and support them and try to strengthen them, because it's a question of human dignity and it's a question of stability for the world and for the human community.
But isn't that a conflict, Mr. Harrington? Because Mr. Gülen was criticized by many, while some were calling him a CIA agent, others were also accusing him to bring a Sharia state. And these were pretty much the same arguments in the trial process. What was your conclusion?
Clearly he's not a CIA agent, because, you know, when he came here for his health reasons, the Mayo Clinic, the United States tried to deport him. And the United States spent 2 years trying to deport him. So you can't be a CIA agent when the government at the highest level, you know, according to the judge, was trying to deport him. So, and you see all these allegations, you know, that go on and are just ridiculous. If you look at the allegations that were brought in the indictment, for example, you know, he's a CIA agent, he's an agent of Iran, he's an agent of China, he's an agent of Reverend Moon, he's an agent of anybody you can think of as just playing to the audience. And of course, my favorite one is that he's a secret cardinal of the Pope. I mean, that is utterly, utterly ridiculous. You know, I'm a Catholic myself, and you know, it's just absurd to think that anybody would think that you could be a secret cardinal of the Pope. But what it is playing to an audience and getting the audience uneasy. You know, one of the things that's going on, I think, with the United States and with what we call the West, is that we don't understand what is secularism in terms of Turkey. Turkey, of course, has had a secularist government, republic. But in Turkey, secularist means something different than it does here for us. Here, secularist means separation of church and state, but people are free to express themselves and participate in any way they want, wear anything they want, as long as their religious beliefs do not hurt somebody else. In Turkey, of course, the secularism has meant no expression in public employment or public education of religion. And this is, of course, where the headscarf issue comes up. So when this is translated back to the West, it says Turkey is moving away from its secularism, or this movement wants to bring it away from its secularism. There's a misunderstanding, and I think that misunderstanding comes from the way that we use the word. If you tell people in the United States that what Turkey is moving toward, or what the movement is interested in, is the kind of secularism that we have, where there is separation of church and state or separation of mosque and state, but people can still express themselves, Like here, our folks in government, if they're wearing that, they can wear the headscarf, they can wear whatever is their particular religious belief.
What do you think he's after then?
To me, when I look at the movement and Mr. Gülen, it looks to me like it's a very good effort to institute civil society, to make our institutions in civil society, our voluntary organizations, better, to reach out and help people, particularly the poor. And this is brought about, of course, because out of spirituality, a person's individual spirituality. And I think, to me, as a Christian, this has been very impressive. And I think, and actually it's made me look at myself and my own religious belief and sort of examine my own conscience about how good I'm doing in terms of my religious belief. But I think fundamentally that's what this is that this isn't some sort of organized, structured movement, but it's a decentralized movement. It is really people on their own initiative around the world, around Turkey, following, trying to live better lives personally and trying to help other people out. To me, it's a very impressive movement, and it's something I think that we, in our country, in the United States and other countries, ought to support.
How would you summarize your book in a few sentences?
I think if I had to summarize it, I think that it's a fascinating story of how democratic change was coming to Turkey, how the establishment resisted it, and how the fortunate event of trying to become part of the European Union made a lot of changes in the system. And so ultimately, both the trial and that whole 8 years, that historical context, has helped make Turkey more of a democracy, and I think has helped establish civil society and helped expand religious freedom and freedom of expression. I think it's a remarkable story, a remarkable period of time for history, for Turkey.
What would be your final message to the people in Turkey?
Well, first of all, I would commend the people in Turkey for their struggle to become more of a democracy and to participate. And I think whether or not people belong to the movement or want to be part of the movement, I think is irrelevant in a sense. I think people should be challenged in their own lives to try to do what the movement wants to do. And that is, number one, develop a closer spirituality and relationship with God. And I think the second part of this is to reach out and help people, because that's what life is about, is helping people. It's not a selfishness. It's not trying to get as much money as you want. So that's what the movement teaches. And whether people agree with the movement or whatever, they should look at that particular message and then look at their own lives and then try to live a better life.
Mr. Harrington, thank you so much for the interview.